Hi everyone, I'm sorry you hate me on Tumblr, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Rory album, All We Need. Rory is an Atlanta singer and rapper, songwriter, and this is his full-length commercial debut. And the thing that's interesting about Rory on this record, and when he broke with his little debut mixtape Indigo Child, is that he fuses these worlds of music like indie folk and hip-hop. Think a little bit of Andre 3000 mixed with a little bit of Fleet Foxes. Now, prior to the release of this album and his breakthrough tape, he did have some mild internet hits, tracks like God's Whisper, as well as Cigarette Song. Tracks that weren't that fantastic, but they weren't really that bad either, in my opinion. However, the mixtape that these songs landed on was incredibly rough. From the songs, to the singing, to the recording, to the rapping, nearly everything on this record sounded like it could have used an incredible amount of improvement. But it was still interesting that Rory was fusing the musical worlds that he was. And I'm willing to write this mixtape off because at the time that this tape dropped, Rory was really young. He's still young now, and the hype that he had for this mixtape really came out of nowhere. And since then, he seems to have grown as an artist a little bit, been collaborating with some other pretty interesting artists, done some cool features. So I did go into this new album with high hopes, but I think Rory has only given us a record that is only slightly better than his previous mixtape. I think the largest improvement that Rory has brought to the table on this record is a lyrical one. He seems to be choosing his words and his messages a lot more carefully than he was on his last tape, especially on tracks like Forbidden Knowledge, where he seems to be dropping one conscious line after another throughout the entire track. He invites Big Crit onto the song to do the same. And I enjoy what Rory is saying on this track. I think his earnestness and his frankness on these issues is really great. It's really important. However, his monotone voice is just not really doing that much for me. It's not exactly compelling, and the same monotone sound kind of pulls down a lot of the other tracks in the track listing here. Rory is far from convincing when he is just pleading with some girl to respond to his texts on the song Love Is Not a Four-Letter Word, where after getting frustrated with her lack of response, he essentially brings himself to a conclusion where he's the one rejecting her and he doesn't need her anyway. Ah! However, for the most part, I do give Rory poetry points on this record. Although every once in a while we do get a line like, "You can be salty like those fries if you supersize them." I know what this is. Cal, you ghost wrote that line, didn't you? I know you're ghostwriting. I know it when I hear it. I know when you're ghostwriting. You keep at that. That's good. It's good that you're getting work. Then there's the production on this record, and the singing, which I think has only slightly improved. There is bigger and more extravagant instrumentation on a lot of the mixes of these songs, but it comes together in a slightly sloppy way occasionally. There are exceptions, like on the thunderous walls of synths on the song Her, but for the most part the instrumentation sounds a little flat, a little cluttered, namely on the song Devil's Whisper, or on the song Love Is Not a Four-Letter Word, where we get this out-of-place jaw harp boinging away against some really bright brass. And there are a few spots here, like the closing track, namely, where the instrumentation just sounds way too sugary for its own good. And like with Rory's last mixtape, there are a lot of vocal harmonies on this thing, but rather than improve them in any kind of way, it feels like Rory has just started to tuck them back in the distance in the mix so that the flubs and the fact that the vocal harmonies don't come together that well isn't really a focal point. But the thing is, these vocal harmonies, they really should be up front in order to color these tracks properly and really provide some kind of impact and punch. Instead, they just kind of hide away in the back and don't really provide that much flavor. However, I wouldn't say that this record is all bad. Once again, Rory is one of the few artists fusing these worlds of folk and hip-hop together in a way that feels authentic, natural, and doesn't make me cringe. Like on the track Trap Tears, which is a song that goes over way better than I think it should have. Given its really somber acoustic intro, we get a bunch of lyrics that kind of talk about addiction and I guess the downside of the trap. And then once the hook pops in, we get this booming sub bass, kind of a trap style instrumental comes rolling in. Rory's vocals are just so deadpan but stone-faced in such a way where he sounds like he's emotionless and cold, sort of like after years of being tortured over these issues, and now he's just kind of numb to the pain. And I think the song Mama is actually really heartfelt, and a surprising change of pace from the silly, completely unnecessary argument that he placed onto his last mixtape with who seemed like his mother. And now he's kind of giving her this tribute in such a way where it's actually a really moving, compelling song. It may be a little cliched here and there with some of his vocalizations, but I do think he puts a little bit more expression in his vocals than he did on some of the other tracks here. And there are some other songs on here where I think the tunes really stand out, even if I think the vocal delivery isn't really that fantastic. Songs like Revolution, where we actually get a pretty cool refrain on this track, and there are some slight hints of Kanye influence going into the production on this thing. And surprisingly enough, I kind of like the song CPU as well. Not only is RZA's verse on this track pretty cool, but Rory's vocal melody is great as well. And I don't know why, but once he's kind of manipulated his voice and thrown, I don't know, some auto-tune or something over it on this cut, he's singing in a more expressive manner on this track too. I also want to say this is one of several tracks on this record where Rory really seems to channel his inner Kanye. But like with Rory's last mixtape, I think we have a little bit of unnecessary filler on this thing too. I think DJ Slow Jazz is quite possibly one of the worst album filler concepts I've heard in a long time. It really adds nothing to the character or what little narrative this album has. It's just kind of a constant, obnoxious, cliched distraction of a smooth talking radio DJ that doesn't even really fit the character of the music on this thing. Yeah, pretty torn on this record. I mean, it's certainly an improvement past his last album, and I guess at this point I'm starting to see the potential in Rory that a lot of other people are. I mean, I guess I kind of see the hype this time a bit more. However, I don't think this album executes with fantastic performances and songs on the interesting fusion of musical worlds that Rory presents. I appreciate that Rory is very versatile, and it seems like he has a lot of irons in the fire between his guitar playing and his songwriting and his singing and his rapping, all of which he pulls together pretty well, but he does neither of them amazingly. I'm feeling a decent to strong 5 on this LP. Tran. Zishin, have you have you given this record a listen? If you have, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Rory, forever.